Hello, good morning everyone. I'm David Fenlon. I'm moderating this panel to a degree, and we'll quickly introduce my two colleagues here, and we'll give a little bit of a rundown of what we're up to. So starting with Josh.
Hello everybody, my name is Josh Kingett. For those I haven't already had the chance to meet, I kind of wear two hats at the moment. So in one role, I am an esports executive with my colleague here, Liam, for Digital Isle of Man. And on the other side, I'm the CEO of an esports organisation called X7. We're registered on the Isle of Man but compete internationally with a business model that transfers primarily Korean players into Europe and onto European or American franchise teams. So that's what I do.
Hi everyone. I don't have an esports organisation, but I am part of Digital Isle of Man alongside Josh. Prior to joining and working on this initiative, I was a part of the games publishing industry, and prior to that, tournament operations for the wider esports industry. I've been involved with that for around 8 years now. So between Josh and myself, I have a perspective on the game publishing and tournament operations side of things, and Josh has much more of a team and player focused approach to the industry. And between the two of us, we cover a pretty wide swath of the space.
I've been around with Isle of Man for a while now, helping with the strategy from its outset and seeing how things changed. And things have changed a bit, so we're just going to go through that. So to just go through a little bit today what we're going to be up to. So I'm going to be covering the state of the market. That has changed, and the opportunities there for us and what we should be looking at. Josh is going to be talking about a catalogue of products, which we're going to start offering the market and going to partner with. And Liam's going to focus a little bit more on the approach to market, so how we're going to get ourselves in front of the right groups and get businesses ultimately to come to the island. Now we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards. We want to spend the majority of time put towards questions, so please feel free to put your hands up or put anything online for questions and we'll read them out. So to start with the state of the nation, we've heard a lot about change earlier today from Raxel. Like there's been a lot going on, including there's a war now, which there wasn't this time last year. There's been 2 crypto crashes, and we had a PM for 45 days, which ultimately turned our economy into something which is less than desirable. Some of this has had a knock-on effect on the esports industry, some of it hasn't. So whilst everyone talks about change, there is some change here, but not necessarily wholesale. To put it in perspective, the crypto crash has had much more of an effect on the esports industry than, for instance, interest rates or indeed the war, for that matter, in Ukraine. And to put it in perspective, the FTX who were some of you would have seen earlier this week seem to be going under, allegedly. Ultimately, they put in the biggest esports sponsorship of all time. Now that was for $210 million to a team called TSM, which is a phenomenally large amount of money. To put it in perspective, to sponsor Aston Martin at the F1 would cost you $5 million a year. So this is, as an order of magnitude, this is enormous. Now that's not going to materialise, but after having a very frothy bull market in the first half of this year, the crypto crash really brought the end of that. So there's been a bit of a shift as part of all of this, and also because investor sentiment has shifted as well because of economic downturn, there's been a slightly different approach to those in the marketplace, and that is a shift from looking at legitimacy as something to invest in to be something that's more revenue making. But the things that haven't really changed are the fact that the industry is still growing heavily, and where crypto was a big pusher of some of the sponsorship money that was coming into the industry, that the gambling companies have stepped into the breach, amongst other things. Also, there is a element of it being slightly recession-proof, and what I mean by that is a recession does have impact upon esports and video gaming as a whole. However, what we've seen from the pandemic and also other recessions has been that when people are made redundant or lose their jobs, they tend to play more video games, they tend to watch more people play more video games, and will part with money despite the fact that they don't have that much. So, whilst it's not necessarily recession-proof, it's significantly more resilient than most other industries, and is in a position where it is considered a less risky growth asset than some other places as well. And that means that the growth rates are going to probably remain as they are, but may not be taken off. But there is this feeling of how do they scale up, and ultimately, how do they get from being dependent upon the next raise from investors to being a self-sustaining industry. Now, as we can see from here, that we're in the scale-up stage, ultimately, of the industry. So margins have probably gone down a fair bit, but the reality is that from an industry that was, from the outset, global, there's now a real question mark being put to these companies. How are they going to scale? And that is something which ultimately jurisdictions like ours can help them solve, and the businesses involved in that. Now, interestingly, during this period, a lot of our competition has dropped off. That's not to say that there isn't significant investment by jurisdictions in the market. For instance, Saudi Arabia is looking to pump 50 billion into the market. But some of the jurisdictions which would be natural competitors to the Isle of Man, Malta as an example, Nevada, somewhere like New Jersey, Hong Kong, a lot of these areas have pulled back. And the reasoning behind a lot of this is manifold, but the result is that the Isle of Man now has this lovely white space, which it can act as a regional hub ultimately for some of the larger investing jurisdictions, so some of the Middle Eastern investors, for instance, or is in a position where it is acting as the headquarters or a friendly place for esports companies to come to, and doesn't really have many others who are competing with it. So this is a great opportunity for the Isle of Man, but accordingly we've had to push forward a slightly different approach and a much more straightforward set of products rather than the more complicated and complex offering we had previously. I'm going to be passing over to Josh now to talk a little about the type of products that we're looking at, and also what we're offering in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of familiar faces in the room. As our boss Lyle alluded to earlier in the presentation upstairs, we hosted 3 separate workshop sessions in June earlier this year as part of our on-island Esports for Business event. The idea for that was to loosely upskill businesses, identify where areas could be addressed, how we could get involved, and hopefully tailor some products towards the esports industry. Something we're looking towards next year is going to market with essentially a digital directory or yellow pages of product, services, offerings that on-island businesses can provide to the esports industry. So some in the room will have already been contacted by myself. It's an initiative that we're trying to drive right now. If you haven't already been contacted, but you did come to the Esports for Business event, or you at least registered your interest, I will be in touch in the coming weeks. And also, if I haven't been in touch at all, and you didn't know we even hosted an esports event in June earlier this year on Ireland, then please find me afterwards, and we can link up and share details. So essentially what this is, as I said, it's a digital yellow pages. It will go live on the Digital Isle of Man website. We'll also probably bring a QR code or something to international events we travel to next year. And it's a way of telling our contacts, myself, Liam, and David, who we already know in the industry, as well as new faces we meet, hey, this is what the Isle of Man has to offer, and listed against each of your company will be a set of services that you feel as though you can provide to the esports industry, and we can help facilitate that handshake process, make the introductions, and hopefully bring more business to the Isle of Man.
On the topic of those conferences and going out to that, that's a much more concentrated effort that we're doing next year. We're going to market next year and looking to sell to the market what the Isle of Man has to offer next year. A big focus for us this year, as was alluded to upstairs, was around profiling what the regulatory needs are, what the level of maturity for that need is presently within this year, and understanding what the market was looking for. We have that information now, and we recognized quite quickly that the current needs for regulation within the space were quite narrow, and the profile for how much of a hook it would be in the present state of the industry was quite narrow. Those are still things that are important for us to continue and look to display how, from a governance standpoint, we can support the industry. But from a bare bones perspective, these businesses are currently looking for partnerships. They're looking for ways in which they can move their businesses forward. They're looking for service providers. They're looking for ways that they can approach new demographics. And we know that partnership with businesses that we have on island who have that expertise in a wide variety of different number of sectors and services is a way that we can go to market and have that received well. We received that message loud and clear this year, and next year the conference schedule that is currently a work in progress because a lot of these events have not been announced and the dates are not finalized, but as that information is released and that conference calendar is built out, we will be working with on-island businesses so that you know about that opportunity and we can present a united front together in that catalog and at those events.
So I think that there are a number of things just to sort of think about here. My heart sank a little bit when I saw all the e-gaming numbers, and then fintech, and I saw esports with a big fat zero in terms of jobs upstairs, and I was thinking, oh Christ, that doesn't look very good for us. But I think that the things that aren't really talked about is that a dozen businesses, from very large to small and growing, have over the last year wanted to get involved in the island in some way, shape, or form. And it took us a while to recognise that what sort of products are they after, and also to be in a position where we're trying to position the island the best way for them. So I think that what we have at this stage is that we noticed relatively recently that actually the basic products that the island provides is good enough in many instances. They may need to be repackaged and slightly repurposed, but ultimately a lot of the things that are being provided by the island, if done in the correct sort of format, can bring these businesses to the island. But I think this has been something that's a bit of a learning process around how to repackage to a degree what we already have, and then also enhance some of our offerings as well. Now, part of this comes back to the fact that we have, in essence, an industry that's still trying to, become sustainable. A number of esports businesses are not profitable at this moment in time. So that's just something to be mindful of, okay? They will be looking for investment in some way, shape or form. And they're trying to work out, to get to sustainability, do they do it by growth and revenue alone in an organic fashion, or do they do it by asking for a large amount of money from somebody to back them in some way, shape or form? Now, we can certainly help with their scalability and their revenue growing potential with the products that we already have and the services that the business on the island provide. But equally, we are starting to investigate what can be done through investment partners around the world that be looking for a place to house some of these companies that they're trying to get involved in. Equally, there is an element of, in such an immature industry, there is an element of where the infrastructure around the industry itself still needs to be built. And that's part of the reason why the regulatory piece is considered interesting by different groups, but there is some fear around it. So we're trying to look at this in a different sort of format, where how does things such as regulation, or at least some form of recognition from the Isle of Man, how does that make it more likely that you ought to receive revenue? So there are a number of initiatives about that, which you can talk to any of us three afterwards, but these can include that the brands, that the esports brands involved are advertising safe, for instance, amongst other things. But there's still an enormous opportunity here. And the big thing about this is that the industry is growing and needs a home in some way, shape or form. And it's not going to be dominated by any one territory. But what is surprising at this stage, and continues to surprise me, is that there are a few jurisdictions who have worked out this is a growth industry and that they are doubling down on. And whilst a number of other jurisdictions are use video gaming and to a lesser extent esports as a bit of a political piñata to blame problems that they have in society on, rather than actually, some of the fundamental issues there. And these include places like China and the United States. Previous presidents in the United States have said that video gaming is the reason why why there's gun crime, as opposed to the fact there's ubiquitous guns everywhere. So I think that being open-minded and actually being solution-focused for the industry is something which, in itself actually brings us to the front of the queue as a location, along with all the other benefits that there are and the services that we provide. So it's something that we're looking to ultimately, encapsulate into easy-to-understand products, and also make it quite obvious to the market that they have the ability to set up here, and this is a place to be. So with that, if there are any questions, now's the time to put your hands up. We also have a few things coming on through the iPad as well. So I'm going to put it to the floor. If none of you put your hands up, I'm going to continue to talk, okay, which is that. And I'm probably going to ask you a few questions as well. I have a question or two here already, but starting off with yourselves, where do you see businesses in the island benefiting in the next 2 years?
I can obviously talk from a company structure perspective, which encapsulates all the players, the coaches, the managers, all the cogs that work behind an esports structure. A lot of the easy answer would be CSPs. CSPs would play a massive part. Without dropping any names, I myself work with an on-island CSP, so I can see the benefits firsthand. Comes down from banking, comes to company structure, comes down to writing contracts, especially in esports being such a young industry. Player contracts are very loose. There's a lot of malpractice and sometimes manipulation or predatory contracts. Some of these esports competitors are as young as 14, 15 years old. Sometimes they go straight over the head of a guardian or a parent. And they can sometimes take a high advantage of these young individuals. So CSPs definitely have a part to play. I've already alluded to it, but banks, financial services, wealth protection, wealth management. These are very young people earning sometimes millions and millions every year. It's not uncommon to see a multi-million pound contract for some of these players. And so firms, if they're in that space, could definitely start managing some of those individuals and at least guide them as to where to save their money.
From a perspective looking at going out to market next year, one of the targets that you'll have saw listed as a objective for us next year is to bring 10 clients to businesses on the island. One of the things that we recognize in the coming years is you have to get that snowball effect. You have to build an initial center of mass and reason why this as a location is going to be like an area of attention, an area of demonstrated success in case studies. So that's part of where we expect to see benefit is the development of those case studies. We have refined customer profiles in terms of what type of business we expect to be able to form partnerships between both the industry and then make those connections to the island next year. And that is the areas that success can then be looked at and replicated from, and that's where I would expect it to be. Where we will find the most success with that, we have different ideas as to what will work when we go to market, but obviously when you hit the market with a product offering, how it responds will demonstrate that success first and foremost.
Fantastic. We have a number of questions, I think, through Slido. So I'll just read this one straight out. If FTX were leading the way with their reckless spending, do you think the overvaluation and following correction of the esports space will push many competing jurisdictions out of contention?
I think that as with any speculative emerging industries, when the economy hits a downturn, there's going to be that much more critical investor base when it comes to examining opportunities within that. The shift, though, within that is that it's a subsection of the video games industry that, regardless of the economic downturn at the moment, is still seeing record growth. And a lot of both investment and eyes towards the demographics that are engaging with this industry recognize that this is an investment in a younger age group that is going to scale over time. So there's a long-form view that there's going to be a correction, not a long-form view, there's going to be a correction based on availability of resources within this year, but it's not necessarily going to be something that doesn't then rear its head when capital is once again more available. I think that this is a longer-term area where there's going to be lots of interest, and emerging markets all over the world at the minute. There are currently places where esports is more mature and then far less mature, and in each of those different territories, this same cycle is going to occur.
Just to sort of jump on that, I work in the investment sector a bit in this place, and I think that the downturn and the performance of crypto exchanges and so forth, FTX being a little bit of a pantomime villain right now, but esports is considered in the sort of higher growth areas a less risky industry right now in comparison to some of the crypto pieces that are out there, NFTs, Web3, which is very poorly defined, and a number of investors see esports as something that is actually, they can actually see it's tangible. They see people turning up to stadiums now, in particular now the pandemic's finished. And this is something which is less of the kind of bullshit bingo that you do get of some of the other markets that are out there. So there is more attention going from an investor perspective around from some of the riskier assets. And in some ways, esports is seen as less risky, which is interesting. But there is a correction due in the market in this, and we're starting to see it. It goes back down to sustainable businesses and those that actually can demonstrate they can scale. And this is a potential problem for those in the market because they've built this from their bedroom and they haven't really considered about like what a scale-up business looks like. Our businesses on the island can essentially accelerate 6 to 12 months worth of pain trying to work that out, because they've done this for the e-gaming industry before. They know how to get international companies which are based remotely to work. And the other part of this is that some of the sponsorships which are starting to come into the fore now in crypto are some of the gambling sponsorships. Some of the big sponsors of esports are actually based on this island. So there's a big opportunity there for those who can link those dots. So it's, I think, from an economy perspective and so forth, and from an investment perspective, yes, there's a correction during the market, but it's probably not going to be quite as ferocious as some of the other high growth areas which are likely to have issues. When I see a lack of hands or a lack of questions, it's either a case of people like are bored or they are stunned into silence with the magnificence of what we said. Now, I don't think it's the latter. So, we're going to continue to ask questions here. Like, if you're still mulling over questions, fine. Don't be shy. Please put your hands up. Okay, like it's very gratifying, like having people ask questions rather than us talk amongst ourselves, because we do that a lot. And whilst we enjoy it, I don't think it's necessarily the purpose of this. But whilst we're all here, so in terms of, there are different levels within the esports industry. There are things such as it's not just teams and tournament organisers. There are publishers. There are technology companies, talent companies, marketing companies, social media groups, all sorts of things going on there. Where are the immediate areas of potential low-hanging fruit do you foresee?
For me, one of the main components that I've been considering when it's like looking at what kind of business, okay, we go to a conference out in the esports industry and we have these different sectors and profiles, teams, leagues, publishers, everything in that vein. What kind of business right now is going to be willing to make that leap? And the answer is much more those in a digital services provision or a contractual services provision. So Things like data platforms for sports books. They don't necessarily have to have a physical location tie to where events are taking place currently. They don't have to have a relationship tie that is physical and next door to game publishers. The same can be said for digital platforms for event organization or tournament organization. There's a lot of different ancillary businesses that are a good way for us to approach the market right now that don't have the same kind of blockers that trying to presently relocate a tournament organizer who has physical event operation requirements in a different jurisdiction presently. That's where I see the immediate low-hanging fruit is businesses that have that digital etherealness that we can move here and that with partnerships here would be able to uplift and scale their operations to a very global level.
Quick question here, like to the audience actually, like who here is from a CSP? Okay. Who here is from the gambling industry? And in terms of other infrastructure, how many people here are from groups like data centers or groups facilitating things around the island? What other industries are here actually, just out of interest? Feel free to shout them out. I'm kind of curious here as to why people have turned up to this to a certain degree, because we're like, we're sort of pushing this out.
I want that the FSA will tell me off.
Okay. So I think that from a CSP perspective, what we have found is simple messages around products that come to the island actually are far more effective than trying to give a sophisticated thing of like, we're going to create this wonderful thing, okay? That can come as part of it, but it comes down to you would go to the island because there are all sorts of benefits there to scale internationally. It gives you that particular, and these consist of X, Y, and Z, and there are financial benefits of this as well. That basic reason of turning up, okay, beats the vast majority of other jurisdictions because they don't have they don't have any coherent products whatsoever, really. They're just saying it's a lovely place to live in wherever, okay, or we have a video game publisher from whatever that case may be, if they bother with that. So that's one piece. From a gambling perspective, there's an enormous cross-section, and people in the gambling sector will know this anyway, there's an enormous crossover between gambling and esports, but the areas where the Venn diagram doesn't touch can be quite vicious in terms of their dislike of gambling, and there's a number of things that come off the back of that. Now, I've worked in the esports gambling crossover for a while now. There are ways of being able to make a significant amount of money out of these audiences or out of the businesses involved in this. And it's a win-win-win scenario to a degree because it's providing stuff that's there, but it needs to be unlocked in a very specific sort of a way. From an island perspective, whether it be clients or whether it be esports companies or publishers, etc., there are ways of navigating this, whether they come to the island or not, which are worth just sort of considering, because the island has critical mass in this particular area. And it's worth talking to one of the three of us afterwards, but there are ways of growing your business very, very significantly in this industry by approaching it in a different way to more traditional gamblers, let's say, or the previous push with when e-gaming came online in the first instance. In terms of the groups who are part of data centers and so forth, there's just something to think about here is that esports, latency is very important in esports or video gaming in general. Being able to just plug that to a degree, I think is something which, it's a blunt tool, but it works very, very, very well. So that's something else to talk about. We're trying to support that particular piece and trying to articulate that to those trying to come to the island as well as part of all of this. That basic piece in itself is probably enough, as well as case studies of what's done previously. So I think there's a little bit of something for everyone here, but it's about being able to get the messaging right and very, very clear to these different groups. And I think that just from our perspective, we do need the businesses on the island to contribute as well. Because this isn't going to work with just the government saying this is a lovely place to be and we have some products as part of it. We actually need to be able to sort of say, well, and the flex of our businesses on the island and the services that are there are very, very, very powerful. So that's just another part of this.
Yeah, on that note, and go on, sorry, I saw a question there.
Sorry. I was just wondering, in terms of the esports space, who would you class as being our key competitors in terms of Isle of Man, that you're trying to promote Isle of Man? Who jurisdictionally would you see as being competitors in this space?
I can touch very briefly. I think Malta was a competitor, not so much anymore. In terms of operations, I know they run into issues with their telecoms, often just shutting out. In terms of tournaments and teams want to be based there for efficient practice, that's something that just can't happen. So I think our reputation with data centres, connectivity and such, we're well ahead in that front. And from a financial services perspective and banking perspective as well, I've seen a lot of people leaning towards the Isle of Man than New Jersey, your Guernsey, your Maltas. Not sure if you have something like that.
Yeah, I think that the landscape of you have big spenders like Saudi Arabia and so forth, the Middle East, which have really come into this. They're not really competitors. Ultimately, we're not going in to say we're going to spend 50 billion on this industry. Okay, we're not going to do that, and that's actually what works well because they will look. These groups are looking for satellites or regional hubs, and this is we sit in a combination of regional hub or international scaling station, depending upon where you are. Now, the people who were pitching for that were Nevada, New Jersey to a degree, Malta, Gibraltar put a very, very, very slapdash effort in, which didn't really materialise in very much. Hong Kong was pushing, but essentially is being wiped out by the situations over the last 3 years have just overtaken them. And then a few places like Singapore and so forth. Singapore really is less of a priority now than it was, just because Hong Kong shut down and the entirety of essentially Northeast Asia basically either went to Singapore or to Tokyo, and to a lesser extent Seoul. So they're flooded with opportunity at this stage, and esports is not really higher up their beast. So in terms of competition, we have the field has thinned significantly. But equally, the biggest spenders are now pumping more money in. So there's something here for us. We've got actually a nice bit of white space, which we can take advantage of.
I'm going to have to just wrap things up. I think we're out of time now. As a final reminder, that's what I alluded to earlier, we are building this catalogue of services which we aim to complete by the end of the year. So if I haven't already reached out to you and you're interested in being a part of that, then come find one of us three afterwards. We'd be happy to discuss.
Thank you.